Okay, thanks everyone. I'd like to introduce our founder and president, Norma Levy. Today we're going to be talking about the great noir film, Woman on the Run. And Norma, take it away.
Thank you, Sean. And hello, everybody. I'm so glad you're with us. I'm Norma Levy. I'm the founder and president of New Plaza Cinema. We're a nonprofit organization. Today, we're looking forward to a lively discussion about a special 1950 San Francisco noir suspense film called Woman on the Run. And now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce the host for this talkback, the filmmaker and author, Dan Cahill. Dan, please begin.
Thank you, Norma, and greetings to all of you out there in New Plaza land. Max and Gary are both unavailable today, so I'm filling in, and we have two extra guests today to round out the cast. The first one I will introduce is no stranger to New Plaza. In fact, he gave a lecture for us last week. That would be the Emmy-nominated producer, writer, author, Imogen Smith, who comes to us from California, although it doesn't look like California behind you, but we don't care. And I one day want to sample what's in that glass on the table behind you.
We'll have to go to London to do that.
Okay, I don't mind that. Our next guest is making her debut on New Plaza Cinema. And while she signs in with her picture, I'm going to read you our introduction, which we had online as well. Imogen Sara Smith is the author of In Lonely Places, Film Noir Beyond the City, and Buster Keaton, The Persistence of Comedy. Based in New York City, she has written for Film Comment, Sight and Sound, Reverse Shot, The Criterion Collection, and many other journals, and is a frequent contributor on the Criterion Channel and on Blu-ray discs. Imogen has taught film history at the School of Visual Arts and Main Media workshops. And this is interesting. She is currently working on a biography of Lauren Bacall for Oxford University Press. So welcome, Imogen.
Thank you, Daniel. It's great to be here. I'm really excited to talk about this movie, which I love. And I am in New York, but I guess in spirit, I am in San Francisco, circa 1948.
Good, good. We're all going to be there for about an hour this afternoon. It should be fun. Beginning here, actually, let's see if Imogen can share the trailer for this film, which is the trailer for the restored version on Flickr Alley. And I was unable to get it shared. Let's see if Imogen can do better.
Okay, fingers crossed. I will try to do this.
Don't kill me. Daddy boy, don't.
What's going on down there? Were those shots?
You better call the police. There's been a murder.
It's bad enough to be alone in a big city with no place to go. But as soon as the newspapers hit the streets and the killer finds out he didn't get your husband, there'll be guys looking for him with guns.
Don't scream. You're coming out or going in?
Are you the police?
Smile when you say that. I'm a reporter.
Oh, a newspaper man. Are you just going to leave me dangling here?
Anyone? Where's your husband, Mrs. Johnson?
I don't know.
Did he see the killer?
I don't know.
Should we dance?
Why don't you drop dead?
Thank you, Imogen. And
Well done, Imogen.
Sorry.
thank you. Sorry, I couldn't make it. This is probably a good introduction to a little talk about how this film got lost and then restored. I know Stephen produced a segment on the DVD about it, and Imogen knows most of the story. So I'm going to let you guys try and share the narrative here. How did it get lost? What happened there?
Would you like to take that? It's a great story.
Sure, but please chime in as well, because I know you know the story as well. I have heard this story from Eddie Muller, the founder and president of the Film Noir Foundation, and the key player in this story. The story goes, and I will just take this moment to add that I did see this movie first before it was lost. I saw this movie first at Film Forum years and years ago in a B noir series that they had. And I thought, what a cool movie. And then it kind of seemed to disappear. Eddie was particularly interested in showing the movie because it is a San Francisco movie. He is a San Francisco native. He wanted this for his first San Francisco-based film noir, Noir City Festival, which I believe was around 2002. Do you remember the date?
May I jump in? Yes.
Yes, please.
It was 2003. And do you mind
2003.
if I just say how they found the initial print, or do you want to tell that part of the story?
No, go ahead.
What happened was that Eddie wanted to show this film, and it was produced by a company, an independent company called Fidelity. And Ann Sheridan was a co-producer. She was trying to get away from her sort of Warner Brothers roles and have an independent career. And this company, Fidelity, released the film through Universal Pictures. And all the prints seemed to be gone. But in 2003, Eddie Muller, the so-called noircheologist that we owe so much to, he determined that contractually Universal was supposed to keep one print of this film at the studio. And they were sort of saying, no, we don't have it, and it's not in our records. But because it was this sort of outlier, a film that they hadn't produced themselves but had released, sure enough, there was a print there. And it was not only pristine. Eddie discovered when the projectionist brought it out for the first showing at Noir City, one of Eddie's festivals, that the original studio bands had not been taken off the print. So this was not only a found print, it was a print that had never, ever been run through a single projector. And that's what Imogen and I had the pleasure of seeing at a couple of film festivals. So take it away, Imogen.
Thank you. So Eddie showed the film. He continued to show it occasionally, and it played it around. So it was in the Universal Circulating Library. Then in 2008, there was a devastating vault fire in the vault at Universal where this print was stored, and it was destroyed. And that is how it came to be a lost film. And, you know, I guess there were still probably bootleg video copies and things floating around, but there was no actual known film print until, and maybe you can remind me also of how exactly this was discovered, but a print did turn up in the BFI, the British Film Institute's archive in London.
Yes, they had
You
elements
look
that
like you
needed to
have
be
something to
restored.
say.
They had elements that needed to be restored, but they did find the picture at BFI. And do you know the story about the soundtrack?
I do know the story. So now we have a print, and it looks good, but that print has no sound. And there's another print. There's like a, you know, there's a print that has sound, but it turns out to be so badly deteriorated with nitrate decomposition that the sound is unusable. So Eddie's working with the UCLA Film and Television Archive, and they say, well, you know, we're not going to be able to do this because unless we can find a soundtrack somewhere. And that was the moment when Eddie now tells this story. I guess we can now share this, but when he had originally gotten the print from Universal, knowing that this was the only known print of the film, he had made a copy of it, a digibeta copy, which he put in a bank vault. And this was, you know, not maybe strictly allowed, because he did not have the right to copy the film, but he just had the preservationist's impulse that if anything ever happened to this print, it could be lost. And so, in fact, that clandestine digibeta became the source for the restoration of the sound that is on the Flickr Alley disc, and the restoration that you probably all saw. So crime pays, I guess, is the moral of this very noir story, but a noir story with a happy ending. Because
All the more
film
reason why Eddie is one of our heroes.
absolutely.
And, maybe one day we can lure him to New Plaza Cinema. I don't know, but he does wonderful work at Film Noir Foundation.
And to Universal's credit, when Eddie said, guess what, I made a copy of the print and I have the soundtrack, the head of Universal Preservation sent him back an email that said, good stewardship. So they appreciate
Yes.
what he's done.
And that letter or email will help defend him in a court of law one day. Here's a
Well,
knock on
yes,
the door.
it's been almost 15 years. I think he's in the clear, but who knows? But
Good.
yes,
There's bound to be a statute of limitations on that. I have a few comments I want to make before we go into other matters. And I wanted to talk for a bit about Norman Foster, the director of the film, who has always been known chiefly as a protege of Orson Welles. And he worked with Welles early in both of their careers. And there was a film directed by Foster called Journey into Fear, based on a wonderful novel by Eric Ambler. And Welles acts in the film playing a Turkish cop named Colonel Haki. It's a great performance and a wonderful film, which looks very Wellesian. The camera angles are really extreme and interesting, and it's a very easy film to watch. And somehow from that, a story got started that Welles really directed the film, which Welles has denied to his deathbed. There is some story that he might have shot extra scenes for it, but Foster has the credit on that film, and very few people will dispute it nowadays. I want to cite several other things he directed, but most notably is a film noir, I believe from 1948, with my favorite film title ever.
I know what you are going to mention just from
Burt
you saying that
Lancaster,
now.
Joan Fontaine in Kiss the Blood Off My Hands. Now,
Yes.
I have to say, I have never seen this film. If I had
have.
seen it, yeah, is it any good?
It is, but I can't say it lives up to how lurid the title is.
Indeed,
it
nothing
is.
could. Yeah,
Nothing could. It is a good film. It is set in London. It's got this kind of melancholy, sort of brooding quality. It's Lancaster playing a man who has a sort of violence problem and anger management problem, as is so common with noir protagonists. And she is the woman he gets involved with, who sort of tries to save him. It is worth watching, but
Good.
just however, I will, spoiler alert, nobody kisses the blood off anybody's hands, at least not in the literal sense.
right. Well, anyway, that is available on DVD, and I will seek it out one day. I'm long overdue, but I want to skip to Mr. Foster's TV career, which flourished in the 50s and 60s. And I was a boy in the 50s, and he directed a lot of the cool TV that I was watching. He directed stuff for Disney, specifically episodes of the Davy Crockett series, which was a monster hit, as well as Zorro, which every kid I went to school with was watching and practicing the Z mark. He went on to direct two Bats. One is Bat Masterson, another is Batman, the Loretta Young Show, and the Green Hornet. I mean, these were all very popular things for mass market TV. So Mr. Foster, although not a household name, certainly created a lot of household images that many of us grew up with. And I wanted to celebrate him. Yes, Imogen.
I will also add, you talked about the sort of later part of his career, but before he started directing, he was originally an actor as well.
Yeah.
And he is in a lot of movies from the early 30s through, I think he stopped acting mainly in the late 1930s, but he's kind of a male ingenue type usually
Mhm.
in films, but he's charming, and he was also known for being rather briefly married to Claudette Colbert in the
Right.
I think late 1920s, early 1930s. So
There's a
quite an interesting life,
there's a
and they had a
story
kind of
about that
strange
marriage.
marriage, but
Yes, yes. I almost forgot to mention two other film series much earlier that he directed several films on. The Charlie Chan films, I think he did 3 of those. And ones that I really want to celebrate are the Mr. Moto movies with Peter Lorre. He directed 6 of them. And if you catch up with any of them, they are really well directed and handsomely done visually. So just a little plug for Mr. Moto there. But we should probably move on. We want to talk about Mary, forgive me, Ann Sheridan and her role in this film in getting it made and what her career had been up to this point. So either one of you step in and tell us about Ms. Sheridan.
Imogen, please.
well, Ann Sheridan had been a contract star at Warner Brothers, and she's delightful. She always has this wisecracking persona, but like a lot of people at Warner Brothers, a lot of the stars at Warner Brothers, she was very unhappy there. She was unhappy with the kind of roles she got. I mean, first of all, she felt that, Betty Davis got all the best roles. And then if Betty Davis didn't want a role, it would go to Ida Lupino. And, she was kind of like third in line and would get the roles other people didn't want. And she was always being, they just wanted to sell her as this bombshell. And they saddled her with this nickname, the Oomph Girl, which, she said, what is oomph? It sounds like the sound a fat man makes when he sits down, So she was not happy with sort of the way the studio was treating her or the parts she was getting, although she did make a few really good movies at Warner Brothers. I am a big fan of Nora Prentice, which is another, at least partly set in San Francisco noir. The Unfaithful is very good. They Drive by Night. Stephen, you may have favorites you want to mention. So she does some good stuff, but she really wanted, to have more control over her career and more challenging roles. So she bought her way out of her contract with her own money. And she really wanted to start producing films so that she could have more autonomy. And this film, Woman on the Run, she put some of her own money into it. Stephen, I don't know, you may know more about what other creative roles she might have played. I think it is thought by some that she may have had a hand in selecting Norman Foster as the director.
It is thought that she did, yes. And I recoil at the notion that one sometimes hears of when I covered so many contemporary movie press junkets where actors would say, oh, we didn't really follow the script, we made up the dialogue, and I knew that wasn't true. Woman on the Run is a film that had a number of scripts, but the person who was in charge of supervising continuity wrote a letter saying categorically that there was no finished script, and that Ann Sheridan, Dennis O'Keefe, who was a screenwriter, Robert Keith, were substantial contributors to the dialogue of this movie. And so it was one of those films that I won't say it was improvised, but they took the scenes that were created, and Ann Sheridan was among those successfully embellishing them because she had a real wit in life. As I say, O'Keefe and Keith were writers. So yes, she played an enormous part on this film, and I think it's such an unfortunate thing. If I may just get this out of the way, that they made, I think, a first-class movie, and Universal just kind of dumped it. It didn't make money right out of the gate, and they changed the ad campaign. And strangely enough, they played down the thriller elements, and they said something like, "This is a portrait of a modern marriage, and this is this," and they made it sound like a really somber not entertaining movie to watch. A very odd, and this is not the only time it's happened, but a strange de-evolution of an ad campaign. And then, of course, since Universal didn't make the film, they were not that really invested in promoting it, and it disappeared almost literally. And several years later, Ann Sheridan and Steve Cochran, another escapee from Warner Brothers, teamed up to make a beautiful film for Republic Pictures called Come Next Spring.
I love that movie.
Yes, I love that movie. I mean, that's a really unheralded gem of a film that people should know. Once again, the studio, that in that case, the studio was sort of going under. They didn't really promote it in spite of great reviews. And the two chances Ann Sheridan had to really relaunch her career, which I think were both enormously successful creatively, just didn't find the audiences in their day. And it's unfortunate, which is why I'm so glad we're celebrating this film today. And I'll look forward to hearing later what your viewers thought of it. And I definitely want to hear what Imogen thinks of it, because there are a lot of interesting cases of art imitating life behind the scenes, but then just viewing the film as a film, I think there's a lot to discuss and interesting ideas.
Well, I just want to toss in one other Ann Sheridan anecdote. I'm sure you guys have heard this also, that she was being considered, along with some guy named Ronald Reagan, for the two leads in a film called Casablanca. I don't know if that's a true story or not.
I can
Clearly,
tell
they
you
were not
categorically, I've been in the vaults, I've gone through this, and
Yeah.
never tell another person that, because it isn't true. Warner
Okay.
Brothers did put out a press release saying that they had just optioned a play, that they were going to make a film called Casablanca, and that it was going to star Ronald Reagan and Ann Sheridan. So you would think, well, Stephen, you just contradicted yourself. You
Yeah.
said there's no reason. Never for 1 second did Hal Wallace intend to put them in the movie, in the play that he had just optioned. He said, this is a Bogart project from day one. When Jack Warner tried to get George Raft involved, Hal Wallace said, we are writing this for Bogart. So why were Ronald Reagan and Ann Sheridan mentioned in that press release? Because King's Row was about to open. And it was a way to both announce a new project and for Warner Brothers to get some extra ink on King's Row and promote that film. So
No,
my
I get that.
apologies for being so virulent on this, but
Okay.
I never want
I
anyone to
understand.
think that Ronald Reagan and Ann Sheridan were going to star in Casablanca. They were not.
Nobody would take that seriously, but I want to.
And you've frozen, by the way, Daniel.
Okay, I'll probably come back, I hope. Can you hear me?
You're not frozen for me.
Okay,
Off and on.
all right, I will
Okay.
continue. I'll forge ahead.
Oh.
This is a perfect plug
Well-
for the next film we are going to be doing on a talkback in 2 weeks, is something called Casablanca. So stay tuned for that. I promise I will leave Ann Sheridan and Ronald Reagan out of the discussion. So back to you, Imogen. Other thoughts about the film in general, or?
Sure, and thank you for that, Stephen. I mean, I had always known that this was a myth and that it was not true that they were ever seriously considered, but I had never heard or thought about the King's Row connection. So there's an interesting, just little insight into the way that studios work, as well as the way that then these stories get legs of their own. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to say just a little bit about why I think this is such an extraordinary movie. And it's kind of interesting in connection to what you just said, Stephen, about the ad campaign. And you can kind of see why the studio might have been a little confused about how to market this, because it is a film that starts out seeming like it's a typical hard-boiled crime flick about gangsters and murder and a man on the run, obviously, which was in fact the title of the story on which this was based. And then it really turns out to be a film about a marriage. It's about a woman who becomes the kind of detective, but she's not only searching for her husband, she is searching for the truth about their relationship. And without initially intending to, she kind of stumbles upon these things about him that she didn't know. She gets to see these sides of him she wasn't aware of. She learns that he still loves her. And she also sort of sees herself from these other perspectives. I mean, particularly in the moment when she actually sees the mannequins that he has made on her, that he has made that are based on her face. So it's like the mystery is really the nature of their relationship as much as it is, where is Frank and who is the killer? And there's something very interesting just about the way that between the first scene and the last scene of the movie, there is this complete revolution in the way that these two people feel about each other. They go from being, ready to give up on this marriage to wanting to start over, and yet they are never together throughout the movie. Everything happens while they are apart. And I saw that someone in the chat has said, hope you'll tell the Claudette Colbert story. So just briefly and kind of connected to that, Norman Foster and Claudette Colbert married. They were both on stage at the time and kind of maybe just getting into movies, but for reasons that are still kind of mysterious and murky, they didn't want to tell Claudette Colbert's mother that they were married. They kept their marriage sort of secret to the point of living apart. And I think maybe never actually lived together during their marriage. So there's all these kind of different theories about, was this one of these kind of, beard marriages that was to cover up, the fact that maybe Claudette Colbert actually was, more interested in women, or it's kind of unknown. And the marriage did not last. Norman Foster went on to have a long and happy second marriage to Sally Blaine, who was the older sister of Loretta Young. But it's kind of interesting in that he had this kind of marriage where they were not actually together in a typical way. The other marriage, of course, that everybody thinks about in terms of this movie is the marriage of Alan Campbell and Dorothy Parker, because Alan Campbell wrote the screenplay, and he and Dorothy Parker, I think, maybe were already separated at the time, or at any rate were, and later remarried. So another kind of interesting one. But
they separated in 1947 and remarried in 1950. And that's a perfect overlap with the time he was likely writing the screenplay, using antagonistic scenes with his wife as an inspiration. I don't know, but it makes colorful background.
Possibly. And of course, throughout the movie, there's this interesting, the way that Anne Sheridan's character, Eleanor, is perceived by all of these men, particularly the detective played by Robert Keith, as so kind of unbearably bitter and cynical. And, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a little bit of Dorothy Parker in this character as she initially appears, as well as the kind of, lack of interest in any kind of traditional domestic life. I love the scene where they go in the kitchen and there's nothing except dog food. Right. But just to wrap up one thing I was saying, I see this movie as actually belonging with a kind of group of noir films that I really like, which feature women in this kind of detective role, not as professional, private eyes, but the idea of a woman who sets out to solve a mystery, or, to find a missing person, to clear somebody's name. These include Phantom Lady and Black Angel, both based on stories by Cornell Woolrich, who kind of really liked this premise. The Dark Corner with Lucille Ball as the secretary of a private detective who is more successful than he is at figuring out who is framing him. They're just really fun films, and I think they really contradict the notion a lot of people have that in film noir, women are either, the femme fatale, and they're the temptress who's deadly, or they're the good wife, girlfriend staying at home. There are a lot of these kind of active, smart, often working women, not Anne Sheridan in this movie, but women who go out sort of into the world and solve the problems of the men, in fact. And there's just still, I think, a general sense a lot of people have that film noir always has to have a male protagonist, which is simply not true, or only true if that's the way you choose to define film noir. But there's so many great films of this period in the noir mode with, women protagonists. So I think it's an underappreciated aspect of the whole movement is the many diverse ways in which it addressed women in this post-war moment, which was kind of a transitional moment where women were going from having had a lot more being out in the workplace during the war when men were, and even during the Depression, and suddenly they're being shunted back into the kitchen, back into, being housewives. And you feel a lot of this kind of turbulence around the idea of marriage, of what is a woman's place in the various ways that women are portrayed in noir.
I'm glad you mentioned The Dark Corner and Lucille Ball, because one interesting little observation I must share is that my beloved partner Janet, who watches most of these movies with me, noted Ann Sheridan with a short haircut and thought, there's some kind of resemblance between her and Lucille Ball and the kind of snarky attitude they had with men frequently. I mean, the best line of dialogue in the movie, I think, is, "Why don't you drop dead?" And it's laid out there so forcefully and hilariously. It makes a point about her attitude in the movie, and it's well performed. This might be a good moment for me to try to share my slides on the look of the film. I'm going to see if I can get that called up. Let's see. Oh boy. Yeah, I'm having a hard time. Let's see if we can proceed without that. I should have prepared better. I was preparing to share the trailer, and now I'm not ready to show the slides, but I think we can go ahead without that. There are things we can talk about, like the San Francisco locations. We've all seen the film, and most of them that are actual SF locations have no active dialogue recorded. And that's because it's very hard to do when you're outside in a noisy city. And there are one or two shots where I think they dubbed in Ann Sheridan. There's one where they see who they think is Frank between two boats drawing something, and she turns to O'Keefe and says something, and that's appears to be live dialogue. But the rest of it, they have their backs to the camera as they're walking around San Francisco. And that is a technique to hide the mouths so you won't see that they're post-syncing it afterwards. So there are a couple. Yeah, go ahead.
This is, that's a good point. This is really the moment when movies are just starting, still early, at least in the period where movies are starting to move out of the studio and into real city streets. This was a big aspect of post-war film, particularly noir and crime films. Very influenced by, Italian neorealism and by the documentaries that were made during the war. And suddenly people are wanting a level of realism, that's different from the studio backlots, from the studio sets. There is, this film, The Naked City, shot in New York in 1949. Am I right, Stephen?
Yeah, it's a bit earlier than that. Yeah.
48, 49, we can look it up. Anyway, it's just shortly before this. It's one of the first movies that was entirely shot on location, and where they make a big deal of the city being a character. And was clearly a huge influence on a lot of other films, and some of which you really use this kind of pseudo documentary technique. They're not doing that so much in Woman on the Run, but it still was very challenging. Part of the reason why they had been shooting movies in studios for years was because it was so hard. Once sound came in, it was so hard to do sound live in the city. And so, yeah, it's mostly scenes, all those scenes where she's walking around with Dennis O'Keefe. It's clearly they're just dubbing the sound over what was shot silent, but it's a wonderful.
Sorry, I just wanted to refer to one scene where O'Keefe has been following her, and so has the cop, the female impersonator, as he called her. And Ann Sheridan suddenly stops this stranger and kisses him and pretends that that's her husband. Now that, because there was dialogue, you can see it's rear projection, it's a studio set, and then they're back into the live location work again. And most audiences were probably unaware of that.
May I say something about that? And it speaks to the cleverness of the cinematographer, Hal Moore. He was noted for being one of the best cinematographers when it came to integrating rear screen projection footage and studio. And on this film, partly it was budget. Fidelity Productions or whatever their second word was, Fidelity, was this little independent company. So they really had to use their San Francisco days very strategically. And as you've both pointed out, yes, they did it MOS, no sound. And then they shot a lot of rear screen projections so they could do the bulk of the scenes or the key dialogue moments in studio. But what Hal Moore would do would be, if you look at the film, you will see, for example, Sheridan and Dennis O'Keefe in the foreground, and there's rear screen projection. At one point, there's a door open that's sort of blocking half of the frame a little bit. And then Hal Moore and the director will have people moving on the street in the planes in front and behind them. So moving between the foreground and that rear screen projection. And it really helps trick the eye into not focusing as we can sometimes do with our modern eyes and our digital prints that sometimes show even more than the filmmakers expected to on a nitrate print. But Hal Moore, I think, did a really good job on this film in terms of kind of blurring that effect when possible, of making the rear screen projection subtle. And they also did some very shrewd filming in Los Angeles to pass as San Francisco. Do you want to speak to that, Imogen?
Sure. I was actually just about to bring that up. There are also this, and there's a very fun supplement, which I think, Stephen, you produced for the disc. That
someone
or
else
did
did.
you?
I
Oh, right.
take
Sorry,
credit
that's
for
the
that.
one you did not do. But anyway, they're all fun. But there's a supplement on the disc that shows the locations, and it shows how at certain moments, from shot to shot, you're actually going from one location to another, and sometimes from San Francisco to Los Angeles, like with the change of a camera angle. The opening sequence with the murder is shot on Bunker Hill in Los Angeles, above the Hill Street Tunnel. And the ending is the other main part, that what is supposed to be Playland at the Beach, this amusement park in San Francisco, is in fact Ocean Park in Santa Monica. Eddie's theory about this, I know, is that they had to do it this way because Playland at the Beach was actually cut off from the ocean, from the beach, by the Coast Highway. And so you couldn't have had that scene where she walks along the boardwalk and her husband is making the sand sculptures on the beach. At any rate, I see somebody also in the chat has mentioned Strangers on a Train as another film with an amusement park sequence, but the one that comes to my mind is Lady from Shanghai, which is, of course, Orson Welles, Norman Foster's mentor, and released just, a few years before this, which ends at Playland at the Beach in San Francisco with the famous Hall of Mirrors sequence. And that actually does feature exteriors that were shot in San Francisco. I would not be surprised if Norman Foster might have been somewhat inspired by that. I love, amusement park sequences are a great feature in noir. They're always very sinister and very, a very dark sort of take on the amusement park. The use of the roller coaster and all those incredible point of view shots from the roller coaster, the way that the sound of Laughing Sal is being run through the sound of the roller coaster. It's all just really well done.
It's worth mentioning Laughing Sal because she has the last shot in the film as they fade out. And she was in more than one film, actually. She was in Man in the Dark and DOA.
Yes.
And her laughter helps unlock Edmund O'Brien's amnesia in DOA. And I think it's interesting, as you just said, that they mix in Sal's cackling laughter with the screams of the people on the roller coaster. And it just adds an extra sinister, chilling element to the whole thing.
Right. And it keeps Woman on the Run from having what feels like a totally happy ending, almost like there's this cynical cackle from that figure at the end. But yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
I will just mention, there was more than one Laughing Sal. And I think the one we see in this movie was in fact the one that was in Los Angeles, but the San Francisco Laughing Sal that had been at Playland at the Beach you can go and visit her in the Musée Mécanique, which is one of the old piers along the Embarcadero, a pier that actually also appears in this movie. And yeah, I can't imagine how many generations of children must have been permanently traumatized by seeing Laughing Sal, because you put your coin in and she starts kind of shaking back and forth in this spasmodic way and emitting this cackling, shrill laughter. It's truly, truly terrifying.
Kind of like the killer clown syndrome that we have so popular today that frightens little children. So I'll have to keep my grandson away from that. We are nearing our time out here, but I want to spend some time talking about other people in the cast. Dennis O'Keefe and Robert Keith. Now, about the only thing I know about Robert Keith is that he's the father of Brian Keith, who probably was much better known than his father in his career. But what can either of you tell me about Papa Robert?
Imogen? Oh,
Stephen, go ahead.
Oh, well, he was a playwright. He was a very successful actor who worked for decades. He pops up in everything from The Twilight Zone to, I think, 30s films, and had a very busy career. And if you'll forgive me for jumping over, since I know the time is short, to Dennis O'Keefe, I was just going to say that this film was based on a story called Man on the Run, and it doesn't have a great deal to do with the story. It evolved for the better as it was written. But one of the major changes, in addition to moving the location, I think the story is New York, is that right, Imogen? And then the early drafts of this film, it was going to be New Orleans for the movie. And then from New Orleans, they decided San Francisco. Always easier to do San Francisco since it's closer to Los Angeles and it has great locations. But the big addition that I think makes part of what makes this movie so great also is Dennis O'Keefe, because that character does not exist in the original short story. And Dennis O'Keefe has already been established on screen or in his filmography, kind of like a Lee Tracy. Oh, right. He plays a reporter this time. I've seen him play a reporter before. And that's why it's such a great surprise when we find out he is the guilty party. And I love the way they do that reveal. And as Eddie Muller mentioned, yes, the lighter. And Eddie Muller pointed out that a reviewer of the time said that was just idiotic. And why did they give away that he was the killer so early? And I remember Eddie just saying, well, I have something to say for that critic. He's an idiot. Because it just adds such great suspense, sort of like the third act of Vertigo,
Absolutely.
right? It's like kind of character.
Absolutely. And when Dennis O'Keefe first appears in this movie, there's this almost sort of screwball. It's like a screwball meet cute when they are on the roof, and you think that they're going to develop this kind of, bantering relationship. They're probably going to end up falling in love, and it just goes in this completely different direction. And it becomes so suspenseful once you know that she is traipsing around with the man who is trying to kill her husband. Dennis O'Keefe is in a lot of noir, mostly sort of B noir, but some great movies, things like Raw Deal and T-Man. And he's great because he's one of those actors who can, sort of be the good guy or the bad guy. And the sort of very hail fellow well met kind of tone he has in this is always a little bit obnoxious and a little bit sinister. So it works, but it's not too predictable when he turns out to be the villain. About Robert Keith, I'll just say, I think the thing that on screen at least is so distinctive about him is his voice. I mean, he has one of those really distinctive voices that just is so sort of dripping with scorn and sarcasm a lot of the time in this role and in other roles that he played. Although one of, I think, his most striking film appearances is one in which I think he never speaks, which is in Men in War by Anthony Mann. And also the director of Raw Deal and T-Man. So someone who both these men were involved with a lot, but he plays a army, what is he, a captain or a he's an officer who is shell-shocked and sort of to the point of being catatonic in the Korean War. And he was really a great actor.
Yeah. I want to toss in a few words on Alan Campbell. This is the paragraph I lifted off of IMDb, and some of this we've covered before, but some we haven't. He was married for 27 years altogether to Dorothy Parker, who was 11 years his senior. Theirs was an extremely tempestuous relationship. They divorced in 47 and remarried 3 years later. And Parker often accused him, sometimes in public, of being a homosexual. He was disliked by most of her New York friends and seen as a sponger or hanger-on who was able to have a successful Hollywood screenwriting career as a result of being married to a famous woman. He enjoyed Hollywood. She detested it, although she admitted it paid the bills.
May I just add to that, that there is
Please do.
also there's a counter narrative that he was the one who showed up, did the writing, got her into shape to do the writing when the writing needed to be done. And that because of her fame, he didn't get the credit that he deserved as a rather more disciplined craftsman. And he co-wrote A Star Is Born, the 1937 version. So I will just say that in his favor.
Well,
Yeah.
so I think that we see a clear theme here, which is as very commonly made remark that nobody knows what really goes on in a marriage. And in Woman on the Run, it is clear that even the people in a marriage don't know what goes on in a marriage. So
Yes, indeed. Indeed. Well, we are pushing towards 5 o'clock, and I would summon Sean to come back in and administer some Q&A if we have people with raised hands.
So we don't yet, but if you have a question, Joshua has. So if you have a question, you can click your reactions button and raise your hand, and then we'll call on you. Joshua, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself? And if you want to, turn on your camera. We always like to say hi. Hey, Joshua.
Okay, can you see me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, Ms. Smith, I can't wait for your biography of Lauren Bacall, because she is a very favorite person of mine.
Barely. You look like you're in a film noir.
Yeah, well, what can I tell you? I can light up the room a little bit, but
No, it's
Okay,
fine.
you're fine.
Okay.
And by the way,
And,
if you don't have Imogen's books that she has written to date, they are brilliant. I remember reading Buster Keaton, The Persistence of Comedy, and thinking, I've never thought of Keaton in this way before. And I still consider that the definitive analysis of his creativity. But anyway, I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
No, and before Joshua goes on, at the end, before we close, I'm going to put up a slide with Imogen's books so people can see what they are and where they can get them. So anyway, go ahead, Joshua. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, you were talking about the lack of roles for strong women during this entire period. Is that true, or with regard to across the pond? I mean, the Brits always had strong women in their detective stories, in just about everything they did.
I don't think I was talking about the lack of roles. I would think I was talking about the misperception today of movies from that time period. I think people look back and think that, that film noir was, that women's roles in film noir were always one-dimensional, but I actually think that's not true. And I think there were a lot of great roles for women like Barbara Stanwyck and Joan Crawford and Anne Sheridan that allowed them to play women who are actually really complex and who are very human and who are not either good or bad. I think that's equally true in British films of this period.
And today, someone like Meryl Streep has no equal, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of playing women's roles.
I don't think anyone's going to argue with you there.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Joshua. Lou, do you want to turn on your microphone and show yourself? Lou?
We have Edward.
Oh, I think Lou, let's go with Edward. I think Lou may have cut himself off. Oh, no, here, yeah, he's coming back in. Let's
Okay.
see, but let's,
We
yeah,
have Edward. Let's go.
yeah.
Okay,
go ahead,
hi.
Amy.
Yeah, hi, this is Edward. And you mentioned The Unfaithful, which I love that picture. Uh, and Ann Sheridan, you said, sort of moved away, bought out her contract, went off to do a more independent role. But in some ways, I liked her role in The Unfaithful better. The Woman on the Run has a very rough quality to it. The picture is, maybe it's not a studio picture. Can you explain why the film looks so different? Is it the cinematographer? I just don't understand that.
Are you talking about why she looks different or why the whole look of the film is different?
The
I mean,
whole look of
it's,
the picture.
yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
the
I
whole.
think it's all the things we've talked about, that it's shot on location as opposed to shot in the studio, although actually The Unfaithful has some location shots as well, but it's a different cinematographer,
Different production company.
And
different
the
production
use-
company.
the widespread use of rear projection here, skillful as Hal Moore was, it gives it sort of a more artificial look. And that may be the roughness that you're speaking of.
It was
Yeah,
made probably for a lot less money as well.
Yes.
The Unfaithful seemed to have a finer studio, I guess, Warner, look to it.
Oh, yeah.
And Woman on the Run was
Yeah.
rougher. It was rough around the edges, I guess. I can't explain it better than that.
Stephen, what were you gonna say?
Oh, just different movies, different styles, different time periods, separated by several years. Warner Brothers was always, they were more into glamorizing Sheridan, and she certainly could be glamorous and very entertainingly so, but she made a very conscious decision. And I think, as I say this, I'm thinking, I see your point. She really wanted to come off in this film more, just like Come Next Spring a few years later, as a real person, not as a glamour girl, which she had been since the 30s. So I think that's what you're seeing. You're seeing Hal Moore shooting her in a way, in a different light, literally trying to make, and the haircut that Dan referred to, it's all about changing the Ann Sheridan that people knew from the 40s and trying to reintroduce her. And I think she could have been a busy actress in the 50s with a different look, just as Joan Crawford's look evolved. So many actresses, as they changed decades, if they were fortunate enough to have those long careers.
Yeah, and even the class of the characters she's playing in those two movies are very different. In The Unfaithful, she is very much playing a kind of upper class woman who lives in this big house and has these sort of high society friends. And here, she and her husband are obviously, not making a lot of money. And so I think, to me, the sort of rougher look is very appropriate. Yes. To the role that she's playing and the world that it's a much grittier world. But The Unfaithful is a really good film, which is, deals with what I think was kind of a daring subject of the time, which was, could a woman be forgiven for having cheated on her husband while he was in the service overseas, which was sort of, for post-war America, a pretty sensitive subject.
Yeah.
To which that movie said yes, and here's why.
Indeed.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Edward.
Thank you both for explaining that. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Yeah, okay,
I want to put one little very sad coda on the life of Ann Sheridan, is that she died very young at age 51 of multiple cancers. And she didn't have a lot of time after this movie to get her career fired back up again. But
No.
Anyway, I see my good friend Lou Brothers is chiming in. Lou, can we hear you and see you now?
I hope so. Yes.
Hey,
Sorry, my
there you
computer was acting up a bit ago. Well, the contributions of Laughing Sal aside, I found this film a little unusual for me in that it was a film noir with a happy ending. Now, is that just my ignorance of noir? Are there many more of those? Or I think of them as having not happy endings.
That is a top subject that people debate about. I mean, some people think if you don't have an unhappy ending, it can't be a real noir. I think there are other examples. One of them actually And I guess this constitutes something of a spoiler, but one of them actually is another of my favorite San Francisco noirs, which is Thieves Highway, which has what I think is actually a very satisfying and believable happy ending. I think there are a lot of films from this period where there's some kind of ending that feels very tacked on. And sometimes it would be because of censorship, but sometimes it would just be because the studios thought audiences are not going to want a movie with a, really downer ending, and they would slap a kind of happy, forced happy ending or moralizing ending onto the end of a movie. And you can kind of see the graft where it was put on, and you can feel that it's not the authentic ending. I don't feel that with Woman on the Run. I really believe, sort of going back to what I said about this really interesting development of their relationship. I mean, you can say it's unbelievable that Danny Boy doesn't just plug him once he sees him, that they kind of have to be a little implausible in his behavior at that moment. But the idea that they get back together again, to me, is a believable and satisfying ending. I don't know how
Again, that points to the development of Eleanor's character, that she keeps finding reasons to love her husband again. So it's very plausible. It seems to have been written into the story. But
and to me, this film structure is so unusual because it manages to make us want two people to get together. And we never see them together until the end, and they're kept apart, and that's such an unusual structure. And by the way, Lou, to your question, I would say noir not having a really agreed upon definition. Some people think it's a visual style, some think that it's a philosophical attitude. I would say that many films that most people consider at least noir or partly noir have happy endings. Laura, The Big Sleep, Mildred Pierce come to mind. So, but noir is in the eye of the beholder. So,
well put.
Well, if you're not Mildred Pierce's daughter.
She got what she deserved, Vita.
Yes. By the way, we also had one of those laughing Sal characters in a park near where I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. We called her the Aha Woman.
Very good. Did she scare you?
She did. Yeah. I have traumatic memories of that woman from my childhood.
Okay.
Thanks, Lou.
We're nearing the end, so you can all see the slide we have of Imogen's book covers, and some of you might want to take notes on that or just go to Amazon later. Are there any other cues out there looking for A's, Sean?
I don't see any at this point.
Okay.
I don't see if you see anything. I don't see anything in the chat necessarily.
Okay.
No.
Well, let me just sign off for New Plaza, thanking Imogen and Stephen, hereinafter referred to as the Smiths. And
no relation that I know of, but I'm a great admirer.
And Imogen, we hope we can welcome you back another time. And Stephen, I'm sure we'll be having you back another time. In fact, it's probably scheduled. Aren't you doing something on Casablanca?
No, only enjoying it.
Okay, never mind then. So thank you both extremely for this. I think we had a good program. Any other sign-offs, Sean?
I think we're good. Everyone should get the promotion about Casablanca. We are doing a lecture on that and then a discussion. And so I think that will be definitely a lot of fun. And I also want to thank Imogen and Stephen. Stephen, as always, you're just so great to have, and Imogen, we're just very fortunate to have been able to bring you to our audience. I'm sure I can see the chat now. People are really enjoying it. So thank you so much.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. I hope to come back at some point.
Good.
And it's really great.
And thank you, Dan. Thanks for being our host, Sean.
Sure.
And
sorry, I couldn't share everything, but
Norma. I had to say Norma.
Norma, yes.
Okay, everyone. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Yes,
enjoy
happy
the holidays.
holidays.
Too.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye all.
Bye.